in your journey, but let's go back a bit. Let's go back to moving from Dublin. Why did you decide to move up sticks and move? Was it lifestyle?
I suppose it was really, John. When you come from Donegal, I suppose perhaps there is that.
Always a bit of
there's always that pullback. I think a lot of us have a compass setting that does sort of draw us north, and. Yeah, I loved my life in Dublin, and my husband was also a journalist, and we were busy in our jobs, but largely we'd been having a conversation for some years, like, could we make a life in Donegal work? Is that possible? And we just, we looked at it and we thought, well, how, we work for national media, it'd be very difficult, and then time moved on, and we still kept having the conversation. In fact, it was the kind of conversation we used to have every Sunday before we'd sort of leave Donegal to go back to Dublin on Kennego Bay as we'd walk the beach. Is a life here? Is it possible? Is it a pipe dream? And then, when
you felt you had to be felt that you had to be in the capital.
Yeah, I think, working in national media, I think I was a news journalist for, I've been a journalist for 30 years almost. But yeah, I worked for the Irish Independent. I was on the staff there for years, and I worked for RTE. So it was hard to switch that off, how to be otherwise. I just couldn't see how that was possible. What would I do? How could I make a living? But I think with the birth of our first child, we really started to look at our lives. Did we want to rear our children in the city? My husband's from rural County Monaghan. He lived on the Louth Monaghan border outside Carrickmacross, and we really thought, not just for us, but we wanted to rear our children somewhere else, far from the city.
So both of you are from rural backgrounds.
Yeah, very much
and
so.
Now you mentioned about a pull, there's always a pull back to Donegal, but I think there's also a pull back to the country. If you're born in the country, there's a big part of you always just wants to go back there, and especially once family comes along.
Yeah, I think that's it, John. And my husband and myself, we're both very different in personality, but our values are very similar. And I know that when we would get stressed or life would get busy, there's definitely that pull to the outdoors, to nature. That was very strong for both of us. That was something that we identified in one another very early on. So yeah, I think when our children came along, it was like our days in the city were numbered at that point. Definitely.
So other things aside, how has that move worked out? How long ago was that?
That was 11 years ago, John.
Okay.
11 years ago last month. So
how has the work element, was it as big a shock to the system as you thought it would be?
Actually, I had only worked in newsrooms, so very busy, big newsrooms, and when after I had my second child, I was on my maternity leave, and I was very happy to move back home and be on maternity leave. The day my maternity leave ended, I felt unmoored. I thought, what am I going to do now? Because for anyone who's spent any time in a newsroom, it's a busy environment, and you don't know what way your day's going to go. Some people might describe it as the rock of Sisyphus. You push the rock to the top of the hill and watch it roll down. I quite like that work. Clean sheet start every day. So yeah, it was busy. So when I found myself sort of untethered from all of that had given me so much identity over the years,
it can be all consuming.
It can be all consuming, and the work of a journalist is all consuming. It's I don't think it's like other professions. It's you get involved in stories, and they pull you into their remit, and I love the work.
Yeah.
I really much, if you ask me what was I before I would say anything else, human being, I would say journalist. It was every fibre of me, so it was difficult to put that aside and get on with the task of being what felt like a million miles away from the Daily Newsbeat. And rearing two small boys, that's a busy job in itself, So it was like chalk and cheese,
So in a way, something had to give.
Something had to give, but over the course of those years, I'm quite busy now. My boys are bigger now. They're 14 and 11 now. They're not babies. And obviously I've been very busy over the last course of the last year writing a book. But I also, I went back to work. I work for the Irish Independent. I write features and news, and a lot of Donegal is in the work that I do as well. So,
you didn't give up work, and your husband didn't give up work in the move.
No, mine was a slow burn back to it, if you like. Definitely when the boys were smaller, I took on pieces sort of bit by bit. But my husband was lucky in that when we moved, he rejoined independent newspapers, now Media House, as a columnist, and the business show on Saturday on RT Radio 1 came along, and Richard took that on 9 years ago, and which is, one of RT's top shows on Radio 1 now. So listeners would be very familiar to his voice every Saturday morning. So, work evolved and changed for us, but technology made that possible. That had we up sticks before we did, our move wouldn't have been possible. Also, it was sort of predicated on the fact that we lived along a main road, where we did, when we moved, we had 3 megs of broadband. Not a lot, certainly not a lot for both of us to be online at the same time. If Richard was working, there was no room for anything else. But then fibre to the home came along, which did revolutionise our working lives. So, that change, it did come dropping slowly, but now it's allowed us to do what we do, in a more remote place and live a very different life.
And then COVID came along, and then everybody realised that, you actually can do a whole pile of work from home.
The strange thing is, John, that,
But you were doing all that pre-COVID.
We were. This is the thing. It was almost like we were nearly early innovators for this type of thing, to leave and to try remote working in a rural place. And now people have seen, with COVID, people have pushed the boundaries of their working lives more and more to see what is possible and what is feasible. And it's great to see people actually maybe hankering for a change of life. I mean, the city is packed to capacity. Housing is a problem, so to think that people can change their lives, that may be of huge benefit to them, is amazing.
Yeah, I think it's been seismic. Now, your book deals with those issues, with the work, with moving, with love, and also with loss, because at the stage you moved, you had 2 young boys, but you still wanted to have more in your family. It didn't go to plan.
It didn't, and I think, John, that's the thing. When you roll the pregnancy dice, you don't know what way it's going to go. And we were, we had 2 boys, and we were blessed with two healthy children. But I suppose the heart wants what it wants, and I was mad to have a 3rd child. Maybe not just a 3rd, maybe a 4th. We would have welcomed, any children that came along. But it just didn't pan out that way, and I suffered from, recurrent miscarriage, and it was an incredibly difficult few years in our lives. It was a bit of a roller coaster: pregnant, not pregnant, loss, pregnant again, and then, the worry that comes with when you are, even though all you want to be is pregnant, the worry and constant anxiety because you've experienced loss. There's almost like there's no such thing as relaxing into a pregnancy after a loss. It's just a very different thing. Now, I had 2 textbook pregnancies. It was like falling off a log. Naively, I thought, this is going to be straightforward, and it wasn't. And it was really difficult and traumatic. And I do say this from the point of view as a woman who had, 2 healthy children. My experiences of loss are nothing, compared to someone they're not nothing, but compared to someone who's had no children and experiencing, recurrent miscarriage, wondering and hoping, is this ever going to happen for me? Then that's an entirely different prospect. And, I'm very aware of that. And I've spoken to women in my work. I've spoken to a lot of women who've experienced loss in all its forms. And, it's very tough. And a lot of times it's not talked about, and I just decided when I started to write this book that if I was going to talk about this, it had to be the warts and all. It had to be the sides of grief that, we're not really supposed to show, like anger, like absolute rage at the world and yourself. Like, I had to lay all that out there. If this was going to be authentic and I was going to deal with these things in a really open and honest way, I felt that it had to be really authentic.
What sort of anger? Like sort of why me type anger?
Not so much why me, John, because look, these things happen. I was angry at the world. I was angry when there was another pregnancy announcement. Social media became an absolutely hateful place because there are pregnancy announcements. Obviously, I was angry at myself. Most of that anger was, I think,
What, that your body was letting you down?
Yes. Yeah, and I think that's something that a lot of women who've got in touch with me after, because the Irish Independent published an extract from the book Finding My Wild just 2 weeks ago, and the outpouring in terms of a response I've had from women just, saying, I've never seen it articulated so clearly, the anger that you reserve especially for yourself, because you feel so annoyed and heartbroken that this has happened. But, anger is another side of grief. You know, it's there. It's like the other side of the coin. And for me, it was mainly aimed at myself.
So to try to move beyond the anger and the sadness, you took to swimming and wild swimming. It wasn't just going down to the local pool, it was wild swimming.
I don't know what it was about the water. You know, John, I think the sea has featured, you know, in the stories of my childhood always. I mean, I couldn't live where I live without the sea being a massive influence. But yeah, I think I'd always wanted to be, when we moved back to Nishon, and water is everywhere, we're a peninsula, I wanted the sea to become more of my life. I wanted to become a better swimmer. I wanted it to be very much part of the fabric of my day to day or week to week.
Make the most of
what was, as someone described it, free gym. You know, it's there. It's amazing. Yeah. So yeah, I started I started going to the sea. Now, my husband had been sea swimming, you know, since before I met him, and I used to think, yeah, this is a bit mad, you know, getting in January in the freezing temperatures. But you know, I started going and dipping my toe in, and then, you know, becoming a regular swimmer. And I found, you know, the comfort of the water. It was a place, I suppose, and a lot of people found this during COVID when they couldn't do anything else, that, you know, the sea gives you permission to be yourself. You can cry, you can swim, you can relax, you can, you know, I found it immensely comforting that the sight of the vast blue Atlantic Ocean, some people might think, oh, it looks like it could swallow you whole, but the vastness of it was a huge comfort to me, that you are this little speck in the ocean and your troubles are just this little speck as well. And that, you know, when you watch one wave wash in and wash out, all of a sudden, you know, that's just life. You just got to try and roll with it. And the more I watched the water and spent time in it and swam, you know, I came back to myself. Someone said, the Selkie legend in Donaghy is strong. And my own metamorphosis was almost like that. Yes, I wasn't growing a tail fin and swimming off, but that metamorphosis within myself, of coming back to myself, of feeling comfortable, of feeling whole again after feeling like a failure. You know, so swimming allowed me to come back to that feeling of myself, and it brought me so many gifts. It brought me friendship, it brought me, you know, a social circle, women I'd never met before. It allowed me to become a lot more open, I think, as a human being. And there have been so many gifts from the sea in my life, and I give thanks for it every day.
And it all happened organically, I presume.
It did. I mean, it wasn't a forced thing. It wasn't a forced thing, John. I found myself going there, walking the beach, you know, and then, you know, just dipping my toe. And I remember one day sitting at home and I was quite bereft, and I was sitting listening to the cars going up and down the road, and I hear the ticking of the clock on the wall, and thinking, you know, my boys were in school, and thinking, you know, life is passing you by and you're stuck, you're stagnating here, you know. And I just got the keys to the car and I went to Culdaff Beach. And lots of your listeners will be familiar with Culdaff Beach. It's the most glorious, expansive blue Atlantic Ocean. And that day, I felt a calling to just get in. And this sounds a bit mad, but I actually hopped out of the car, walked and threw the clothes where they landed, and walked into the ocean in my underwear, and just said, you know what, I need to feel these waves for whatever reason. And it was the most free feeling that I'd ever experienced. And that day, I made a promise to the ocean to go back and to, you know, to continue that relationship and that conversation. Keep going back, John. Yeah.
So any day now that you get in for a swim is a good day.
It is. You know what? Even if the weather looks awful, like today's a sort of a grey soup of a day, you know, it's not very enticing to do anything. But I start a Monday morning in the ocean. I struggle with Mondays. I always have. You know, my parents used to say, I don't like Mondays was written for you, because I really don't. But I started there with my husband, and we get the kids to school, and we go and we get into the sea. And no matter what kind of a day it is, the weather, it doesn't matter once you've been in the sea. It can be doing anything, because once you've been in there in the elements, everything seems easier. It's like, I've been in there, I've done that. Yes, I can do this day.
For some people it might be the gym, others it might be, you know, getting out for a walk. But the way you've described the sea experience and the wild swim experience, there is something unique about it. I
think there is, and you know, we're blessed in this part of the world where we live, that we have really beautiful, pristine, unpolluted waters where, you know, you can there's a chance to do that safely. I mean, obviously not every beach is safe to swim in, but it does offer an opportunity. And I think, you know, people talk about blue health, and there's a lot of literature on you know, blue health these days, and how, you know, being in, near or on water all of the health benefits. We know that it lowers our cortisol. We know it lowers our heart rate. You know, there are studies to show that when it induces a meditative state. In fact, our brain waves are shown to take on the very fabric of the waves as we watch them. So we know in science that it's good for us. And sometimes our bodies just innately know that. So for me, it was a pull there. And I'm so grateful that my body responded to that knowledge deeply that held within ourselves.
But our bodies also know that it's really, really cold. So you have to overcome that. And you have to overcome, I suppose, your fear of the cold.
Yeah. I don't know, you know, for me, some days it's unpleasant.
Everybody's different.
Everybody's different.
I always feel that some people's blood's thicker and they don't feel the cold as much. That's my excuse.
Yeah, it's definitely a practice, John. You know, I don't know that if I hadn't been, you know, I think getting in at this time of year may not be the best thing. I think if you've been swimming from August, September right through, it's definitely easier. Yeah, and there's lots of little tips and hints that you can get online about being safe, like warming up afterwards, not staying in for long. You know, wearing the gloves and the little things on your feet.
Booties,
if you're booties, if you're keeping your extremities, and then heating up as quickly as possible. Nice warm coat afterwards, hot drink, getting warm afterwards, not staying in there too long. There are lots of good tips online. Irish Water, you know, Water Safety Ireland, great tips on there if you're unsure. But I don't know that this is the time of year to be doing it. If you haven't started, perhaps wait to the summer and then ease yourself gently in, and you know, find a friend. You know, it's a great social thing to find a buddy and go for a dip with.
Okay, well, all of the benefits are outlined in the book and much more besides. It's called Finding My Wild. It is out now. How a Move to the Edge Brought Me Home. Cathy Donaghy, thank you very much.
Thanks so much, John.